I'm so glad that you are all here for this next Dancer Mental Health Town Hall meeting. This discussion is meant for educational purposes only, and it is not a medical service. If you're in need of medical support, please contact your primary physician for referral. You can also see a lot of available resources on the Minding the Gap website. Our guests today are representing themselves and not their affiliated organizations or institutions. And please feel free to ask questions in the chat feature. I've had issues with the Q&A feature in the past, so that's what I'm encouraging. We'll do our best to address all questions, and any relevant questions we cannot answer live will be addressed in a blog following the town hall. So I'm excited to have all of you here today for this discussion. This has been the most requested topic since we started the Minding the Gap Mental Health Town Hall series. So I am Kathleen McGuire Gaines. I'm the founder of Minding the Gap. I used to be a dancer and have been a contributing writer to Dance Magazine for about 10 years now. I founded Minding the Gap in end of 2018 because I saw an urgent need to see mental health regarding the same seriousness as physical health in dance culture. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to give each of my panelists a few moments just to give you the highlights of who they are and what brought them here. So if I could, I would love to start with the lady who needs no introduction, really. Kathryn Morgan is an accomplished dancer and a tremendous advocate for dancers' mental health and body positivity. So Kathryn, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, hi everybody. I'm Kathryn Morgan. I'm a former soloist at New York City Ballet and now it's coming out soon, a former soloist with Miami City Ballet. I just decided not to renew my contract with the company actually for this very reason, why we're here. I am a huge advocate for mental health, a huge advocate for body image because I have struggled with it my entire career, both at New York City Ballet and Miami City Ballet. And now I'm very fortunate where I'm in a position where I feel like I can be the advocate for all of you guys and talk about it. And also now I kind of have my own brand and career and, you know, I'm going to keep dancing. I have a lot of guest opportunities and things like that. But yeah, I am now forging my own path and I'm just very honored to be here because this is a huge topic. I think a lot of people deal with it and are too afraid to speak up. So that's why it's been really important to me. So happy to be here.
Kathryn, thank you, as always, for your incredible honesty and for sharing that with us. Really appreciate you being here. It's a lot to ask a dancer to come on and be vulnerable the way that you're willing to do, and I know it means a lot to the dancers who follow you. My next esteemed guest is Josh Spell. Josh is a former dancer with PNB and Kansas City Ballet and is currently the consulting therapist for PNB. So Josh, would you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. And Kathleen, thanks so much for having me. As you heard, I was a dancer, for about 20 years. And during that time, had several ups and downs with my mental health, with my body, and never really knew how to talk about it and didn't feel like there was really an opportunity to talk about it unless I kind of sought it out myself. And so, I had the privilege to kind of take a step back from dance, go back into dance. And so that second time that I went back into dancing as a profession, I realized like a lot of the mental chatter, a lot of the poor self-esteem and the inner critic kind of just got spiked up again. And so I kind of took a step back and said, like, what does this all mean? I don't want to continue sort of this world and perpetuating what's going on. So also I was considering retirement. And it was at that time that I realized, oh, I'm really interested in psychology. And so being a dancer, being older in my retirement, older for a dancer, not as a person, but I didn't want to be in school for a long time. And so I took the route with social work and went back and did that, got my undergrad, then got my master's, and started working immediately in eating disorders. kind of realizing that it brought up a lot for me and I wasn't really ready to help other people. So I kind of took a step back and went into just more generalized mental health. And then I got an opportunity to go to another eating disorders clinic that has a really great philosophy, something very different in terms of what I had worked in previously. And it also had an opportunity to work with athletes. And so I was like, okay, I've got to do this. So I went back, and now I'm currently a therapist here in Seattle and helping individuals who are athletes, but just overall, just in general, people. And then also I will be helping dancers. So I'm really happy to be in this conversation and have other experts to kind of talk through this issue of body image, of self-confidence, and just how that really can impact our sense of self.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Josh. And you know, when dancers first started asking about this topic, and they were asking about it from day one, you know, I told them that I needed to make sure I had the right panel, which needed to include, you know, the right experts, and that includes, you know, nutrition expertise. So I'm thrilled to also introduce you to Emily Cook Harrison, who was a dancer with Atlanta Ballet and SMUN, and a registered dietitian. Emily and I have been speaking over the course of many years in articles that I've written. So Emily, welcome, and please go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. I'm just honored to be here and to get to be a part of this fantastic panel. Thank you so much for having me. I got into nutrition as I started to kind of wind down my performing career, because I realized how incredibly important food is to what we do as dancers. And you know, the older I got as a dancer, the more I realized the power and the impact of food and nutrition, and being able to do that in the right way. Like a lot of dancers, I think I had some misguided ideas about food and nutrition and what's good, what's bad when I was younger. And what I set out to do is just try to share with dancers what I wish I had known when I was younger, what I think would have helped me be stronger, better, just mentally better as well. So I went on, as I was kind of finishing up my performing career, I got an undergraduate degree in a bachelor's of science in nutrition. And then I had the great privilege of getting to do my master's of science under one of the sports dietitians for the US Olympic team. So he was the dietitian for the US gymnasts and the marathoners and the ice skaters. And it was a tremendous opportunity to get to really understand sports nutrition from one of the leading experts. And then I went on to do additional training at a prominent eating disorder facility in Atlanta, where I just got to work under some great people and have a deeper understanding of eating challenges from lots of different perspectives. Eating challenges can mean lots of different things. But right now I'm just an advocate for healthy eating and for wellness and for enjoying food should taste good. That's, you know, kind of my philosophy. Enjoy good food.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And, you know, I'm just really honored to have all of you here. So thank you. I also want to acknowledge One Dance UK, who is presenting, is our presenting partner for the town hall today. And my wonderful friend, Erin Sanchez, who's helping us with the town hall today. So let's jump in to this. Kathryn, if it's okay with you, I would love to start with you and just kind of hear, you know, obviously, you know, body image and eating, these are huge things for dancers under the best of circumstances. I would love to hear from you a little bit about what, you know, the current circumstance of the COVID crisis and stay at home, how that maybe is affecting you and the way, you know, you're dealing with it.
Yeah. I think everybody knows, you know, I was very public about this during my time this past year in Miami City Ballet. I did have some challenges with artistic staff being happy with how I looked, and I was taken out of roles last minute after learning them. And, you know, I've spoken out before. I was on the Today Show speaking about it, and also on YouTube about the standard now. I think the standard is still so extreme. You know, we say, oh, it's better now than it used to be and this and that. It's really not, to be totally honest with you. There are a couple of us, my colleagues and I, that have had this issue and, you know, would be learning things and then pulled out at the last minute, or, you know, just told that, you know, you don't have to look a certain way, but the reality is we weren't being cast. So it is a thing. And it kind of, you know, I had gotten to a point where I was so excited to be back in a company because I did have a 9-year gap. And so to be back in the company and then to kind of have it all happen again with body image was very tough, and it did a lot on me mentally. I do have an autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's, so I physically cannot be as small as was expected, and, you know, things like that. So it sort of did a number on my head a little bit. You know, I tried to be very positive about it, but getting pulled out of Firebirds the day before the casting went up after rehearsing it for months was very challenging. And then it happened with actually 2 other roles. So for me, actually, all that to say, this COVID-19 break has helped to not, you know, because I had gotten in such a good place with how I looked, and I'm, you know, never going to be the wafy thin dancer that I was at City Ballet when I was 18. You know, I was literally like barely 100 pounds at 18, and now I'm a size 2 size 02, which is considered large. So for me, actually, it kind of was nice to take a step back during this period and not be in a leotard every day and not looking at myself in the mirror and not looking at the people who were getting cast and me not getting cast and analyzing and just the things that were said to me, and which I don't care to repeat, actually. And so having this break was very good for my mental health. You know, during that time of getting taken out of roles, my illness, the stress I was under, my illness flared back up, my hair started falling out again. And I was just sitting there going, this is not worth it. Your health is not worth this kind of pressure and stress to the point where I was physically getting ill. So I think during this time, it's been nice to kind of take a step back. My stress level has gone down. You know, I have just focused on eating for my body and eating healthy. My boyfriend is amazing and he's cooking for us every night. So we are not even, you know, eating junk food. We are eating super well. And I'm just feeling so much better about it. And, you know, I have not fully announced on YouTube and everything I need to soon about what happened and the reason I decided not to sign my contract again for another year. But that was the reason. And, you know, when you're in it, especially because I lived this when I was, you know, 15, 16, 17, 18, you, at that age, you're like, I'm going to die for ballet. Like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I would do anything for it. And now I'm at the point where, yes, it's my passion. Yes, I love it. But jeopardizing my health and dealing with that, it's just not worth it to me anymore. And I just feel happy that I'm in that kind of place. But that's a hard place to get to. It really is. And so I feel like during this time, it's been a chance, you know, and my advice to you guys is to have this be your step back moment. Have this be a moment where, you know what, I don't have to be in front of everyone in a leotard every day. Even on Zoom, you know, you're doing Zoom classes, it's still not the same thing of analyzing yourself in the mirror all day long, every curve, everything. So I would use this as a time of a little bit of mental healing and being able to take that break, because oftentimes dancers don't get to take a break, you know, so it's kind of a mental shift, I think. And it's done wonders for me, you know, because as I said, I still fully intend on performing, but I have to get back to a place where I feel confident about my body again, because I had gotten there and then it just completely fell off the cliff this year. So that's kind of what I've been focused on during this time period.
Kathryn, thank you so much for your candor. Very impactful. And I think actually I have heard from some dancers, you know, I feel like there's kind of 2 polar opposites that are going on right now. Like there are some that are kind of becoming more obsessive and concerned. And then on the other side, there are people who are like taking a deep breath for the first time, right?
Yes.
So Josh, based on what Kathryn just said, that immediately makes me think about maybe the importance of being kind of present and maybe not worrying about 2 months from now. And I don't know, what are your thoughts based on what she was just saying?
Yeah, you know, what you said kind of about taking a step back and just having a different perspective. I mean, the reality is, right, there are these huge stressors like the mirror, like wearing leotards, having comparison to others that really do, like you said, a number on our self-confidence. And I think that really when we start kind of looking at our own self-worth or ability as a dancer, you know, like our body is a marker for what makes us good or bad as a dancer. And I also want to just name that I am speaking from my experience working outside in eating disorders, but I'm also using some of my own experience. And I think that that's really important to state, because while, yes, I have a formal title, I also have experienced some of this. And I think that I'm even saying it just to remind myself about kind of what it means to actually experience it firsthand in your own life. So also, it makes me think of kind of this idea of zooming in and zooming out. And so when we get just so focused on what's right in front of us, we kind of miss what's happening, just kind of in this larger sort of world event. So kind of really trying to name, like, we are all in a pandemic. COVID-19 is actually real. And so sometimes when we have increased struggles, so I'm referring specifically kind of to body or even kind of our own confidence, kind of seeing like what actually is going on in my life right now, like what's happening. So metaphorically, you know, it might be something more relational or psychological. And so that makes a little more space, you know, for us to actually say, okay, this makes sense why I might be hyper-focusing on, oh, I put on 2 pounds, 5 pounds, or I can't, you know, get my leg up as high, or whatever is going on, right? We get a little bit more focused on sort of these details. So like, if we look at the big picture of what is going on, you know, like there's a lot out there. Thousands of people have died. Gaining 5 pounds, really kind of putting that into perspective, I don't think that's going to ruin your career or your chances, because this is not permanent right now. So I could go on, but I don't want to take up all of the space, but I'm happy to talk more about that. But those are some sort of introductory thoughts.
Totally. Yeah, and I want to come back to more of it. I think, you know, Emily, kind of pivoting over to you, do you have concerns about the ways in which dancers may be approaching food right now?
Yeah, that I've been seeing from my clients, that I've been hearing, even some of my friends. But I want to say that I completely agree with Kathryn and Josh. This is a really unusual, crazy time. This is really earth-shattering. Like nothing like this has ever happened before. And so I really think dancers need to, like you said, just take a step back and give yourself some slack. Be gentle with yourselves. We dancers are known for our extremely high standards, and that's good and that's important. That's what makes us good at what we do. But at this time, it's really crucial to ease up on feelings of perfection. There is no perfection right now. We're all just doing the very best that we can do with what we've got. So I think that some of the ways we can approach that is just maybe easing up with the types of foods that we maybe normally eat. So maybe normally you might be really strict about the kinds of foods that you eat. Maybe you eat all organic or all gluten-free or all whatever perfect. Maybe the food availability right now is harder to find, it's harder to shop for. Maybe it's okay to just eat some canned beans or some frozen veggies. And maybe that's not norm, but don't worry about it. So I think some of the concerns that I'm seeing is that people are being so strict about what they eat that they end up not eating because those foods aren't available, or they're too expensive, or it's hard to grocery shop. And so I just want to say it's important to be eating even if it's not perfect, even if it's not the perfect food. Let's see.
I want to just kind of chime in there, if I can, for a moment, just to talk about kind of some of the work that we do in our clinic. And I would love to move away from more of that evaluative language, you know, just about like having to be so cautious or so careful or labeling food as good or bad. Because what that does is it gets us into this fear or this scarcity mentality. And so when you're at that place, you're going to crave what you say you can't have. So really just having that healthy awareness of sort of our hunger and fullness cues and remaining conscious of what our body is eating. That's kind of the philosophy that we take, attuned eating. So I just wanted to put that in there. Back to you, Emily.
I love that, Josh. I would just completely agree with you. I think that's fantastic. Don't let unattainable high standards with food lead to nutrient deficiencies, lead to protein malnutrition, lead to calcium loss. I mean, the last thing we need right now is not only to be feeling bad mentally, but also to be putting ourselves at higher than average risk for stress fractures. Your body needs these nutrients. And if we are so rigid in our what we will or won't eat, or if we're so rigid in clean eating or organic or whatever food labels we want to put on it, then it could very easily lead to nutrient deficiencies. And that's a big part of the research that I did, and with that dietitian I was telling you about that I work under, the sports dietitian for the U.S. Olympic team, we really looked at how nutrient deficiencies affect injury risk. I'll give you an example. I have one client that I'm working with right now, and I'm a little worried about her because she's been so rigid in her thinking that I can tell she's been eating less and less and less and less. And then recently she said, well, I've been still keeping up with my dancing. I'm doing all my jumps in my garage. And I said, well, is the floor concrete? And she said, yes. And I'm like, okay, let's rethink this. Let's not jump on concrete, because I'm really, I'm so worried right now. Let's not even talk about weight. Let's talk about your injury risk. Like, let's talk about how you're feeling. So I think not being so overly focused on just weight as a number, like Josh said, 2 pounds, 5 pounds, we're in a pandemic. That shouldn't be our main focus area right now. It really needs to be, how are we going to be when we come out of this? How are we going to be when we all go back to the season, or we go back to dancing for whatever reason, for fun or whatever? We want to be stronger. We want to be better. We want to not be injured. And food matters with that. You know, food really plays a huge role in your injury risk and in your mental health.
Yeah, I mean, I know that when I entered my own cycle of injury, which led to unmanaged mental health issues and ultimately my departure from dance, it was a stress fracture that was absolutely brought on by disordered eating. So Kathryn, as you're listening to them speak, I mean, I see you nodding your head, and I know that you receive so much feedback from dancers, and they share a lot with you. So is there anything that you wanted to kind of touch on based on what they're saying about what you think they're experiencing and you yourself?
100%. I'm sitting over here like, yes, because I'm getting lots of emails from students, and I want to move this away just from the rigid eating, but also to the amount of exercise. I'm getting emails saying, I'm doing like your class at 10 and my teacher's class at 11, and then I'm doing like a Pilates class at noon, and then I do like a private, and then I do this person's class. I'm like, you're doing like 100 hours a day on concrete or whatever. So this is also not the time to go for broke in terms of the amount of classes. You know, don't start doing, because they're not the quality classes on the quality floor with your teacher's instruction that you're getting at your ballet studio. So, you know, do what you can, maintain, you know, doing some extra outside, you know, cross training is great, but this is not the time to be killing your point shoes in your kitchen. Like, you know, let's not go back injured because you thought you had to do all this point work and keep your feet up, but you're doing it on your tile floor, and then you have an issue. So that works is in terms of exercise as well, because I think a lot of people are paranoid that they're not going to maintain their technique or their physique, and so they're almost doing too much at home in not a good setting without supervision. So I think you just have to also be gentle in terms of the amount of classes and exercise right now too. I don't think this is not a go for broke time. It's really not.
Kathryn, 100%. I mean, it's something that really concerns me when I look at, you know, the Instagram feed of dancers in classes, and I know young me would have been doing everything I could. So, Josh, that makes my mind immediately go to potentially the connections between exercise addiction and eating disorders, and the way in which those things can kind of exist together. Is there anything you wanna say on that?
Yeah, before I kind of go on to that, I just want to say, like, this actually is going to end. So it is temporary. So kind of what Kathryn, what Emily are saying, like, we want to go back and actually be able to continue dancing. So just another thing to think about, though, is actually the grief that is associated with change and with doing something different. So grief that your body is changing, grief that you're not able to interact with your friends in the same way, grief that, you know, you can't do 32 fouettes and practice that right now because you're not, I hope you're not doing it in the garage. So, but really when we open up that space for, okay, I can be sad, I can be angry, I can just sort of be in denial, then we can actually utilize some self-compassion. And make space for what is actually happening. So I wanted to say that. And then back kind of, Kathleen, to what you were saying about sort of the intersection of exercise and eating. You know, there's a lot of philosophy around, like, eating disorders are just about food, or just about like our relationship with food, or those sort of areas of restriction or whatever that comes about. But exercise is also another way that we purge, right? That we have a deficit in caloric intake, that, you know, we may then give ourselves permission to actually eat because we've exercised for a certain amount of time. Or we're allowing ourselves to eat something like candy or cookies or cakes just because we've exercised for a certain amount of time. And so what Kathryn is saying with, like, oh, I've taken your class, and then I've taken my teacher's class, and I'm doing Pilates and yoga and all of these extra things, that's sort of like checking off the boxes that if I do this, then I can reward myself, or then I am allowed to engage in something fun or joyful. So that mentality of, again, like punishing or having to be so rigid and specific about our day, that actually is disordered. That becomes an obsession, and that eventually can sort of lay the seeds or plant the seeds for a full-blown eating disorder.
Yeah, and such an important distinction, I think, between disordered eating and disordered behavior and an eating disorder, right? And I think sometimes we, as in the dance community, can kind of hold up these disordered behaviors as if they're like markers of sacrifice, right? Like these are the hallmarks of a dedicated dancer. And to that end, there's a question coming in regarding when perhaps a physical therapist or medical provider reinforces these unhealthy norms for a dancer, say you're injured, whatever. Is this something that you all have seen, you know, and do you have advice for that?
I don't know if you want me to take this one.
Yeah.
I'll let you start, Josh, and then Kathryn and Emily, if you have something, I'll come back to you.
I think that the reality of individuals in authoritative positions and not necessarily fully doing their own work does lay the foundation for kind of perpetuating what is actually going on. And so I think it's so important that we know if we are a physical therapist or if we are in these positions, even doctors, right, is that we're not just perpetuating the stigma. And so, like, we as teachers, therapists, role models, dietitians, like, we're in a really good position to identify problems and really facilitate more treatment because we can encourage and support And so I think that actually acknowledging our own bias or what is coming up for us. So I think about like fat phobia, right? I think about thin privilege. I think about what is just rampant in our society that keeps individuals in those roles that you mentioned, Kathleen, still having that judgment about putting that onto someone else. So that is a very real thing.
Yeah, Kathryn, do you have thoughts?
I think you have to remember that you know your body better than anybody. You know, I think you have to remember that you know your own personal struggles, your own personal needs better than anybody. Yes, take advice, take this and that. But, you know, it's the cliche thing of you have to figure out what works for you. When I was first diagnosed with my illness, I went through 9 doctors before I found one who actually took me seriously, because they all looked at me. Because at the time, when I first was diagnosed, I gained 45 pounds in 6 weeks. And I got up to a size 6, which in the ballet world is like, you know, obese, which is ridiculous. And so all these doctors would take one look at me and go, you look fine. Like, what is your problem? And I knew that, yes, while I looked normal and I was absolutely still a normal size, for me, it just the rate of change, the time it took, you know, we were dancing 10 hours a day and I was putting on weight rapidly, that I still knew that I knew my own body, even though many doctors were telling me that I was crazy. So I think you have to take their advice. Obviously, there are professionals, they have studied for this, you know, but at the same time, if something feels wrong to you, if a medical professional is telling you to take 18,000 classes a day, or a PT is telling you to do 2 hours of cross training, and you're just like, I'm feeling a little weird, listen to your own instincts. You know, it's so important to trust your own instincts, because you know yourself better than anybody.
Absolutely. Emily, anything from a nutrition standpoint on this?
Yeah, I have had the good fortune of getting to work with phenomenal medical team at Atlanta Ballet, and then with the dancers that I work with virtually. So for the most part, my experience has been really positive. The psychologists that I've worked with have all been really, really nurturing. The problems that I see are when there's just so much misinformation about nutrition out there, and there's a lot of people who think they're an expert about nutrition, or there's people who read a blog post and then now all of a sudden they're promoting, well, everybody needs to go paleo, or I read a blog post about fasting, so now we're all going to fast, and there's just my concern is that with nutrition specifically, it just seems like there's a lot of people out there that are promoting nutrition practices that are not correct based on science, and they're not necessarily what's good for an athlete. And then the only times I've ever run into issues with medical, professionals recommending something that were contrary to what I would put my dancers on, it's just they just don't understand the dance world. They don't understand the realities that a pre-professional dancer is under. They don't understand the realities of what it feels like to be a professional dancer and be in tights 8 to 10 hours a day. And they didn't mean well, they just don't know. And so I think it's helpful if you can go to people who just understand the dance world, who work with dancers, and can give advice that's a little more specific to what we do. Dancers are very unique. So I think that can be helpful. But I would say in general, I've been pretty lucky to work with some phenomenal medical team members.
Yeah, I would echo, what Kathryn said. Obviously, you know your own body, right? Like, you know the dance world, and not everyone has the ability to go see a doctor, an orthopedic surgeon, or whoever who is an expert or familiar with dancers, right? Because of maybe where they live or whatever access they have. But you can always, your gut knows, right, when something's off, and you can always check that, with someone like Emily or with someone like Josh. There are people out there that you can kind of gut check these things with, right? And not just take it at face value because they're wearing a white coat. Emily, I kind of want to transition a little bit to talking about the food dancers maybe should be eating. I appreciated the point you were making about avoiding this idea of kind of perfect eating and kind of even orthorexic behavior. But you know, in terms of like what your body needs, you know, when you're dancing 8 hours a day and doing Grand Allegro versus maintaining right now, do you have any kind of advice for how they might change their intake a little bit in a way that's healthy and supportive of their nutrition?
I think that that's a really popular question. I get that question a lot, whether it's a global pandemic or maybe I just have a dancer who's injured and they're off for 6 weeks and they say, well, how should I adjust my intake now? I'm going to be on the couch for 6 weeks. So I think that every dancer is different and everybody's energy needs are very personalized. Okay, so there's not just a one size fits all. You can't just go pull a diet plan off of the internet or off of a book and it's going to be perfect for you. It's very personalized. I think if a dancer wants to maintain their pre-quarantine weight, and they're not jumping as much, they're not getting as much cardio, they might not have as high of energy needs. And I think it's good just to remember that the word calories, all that means is the amount of energy a food gives you. You know, they're not bad things, it's just energy. So if you're using slightly less energy in your day, it's okay to have slightly less energy in the food intake. When I say slightly, I want to clarify that. I don't mean going to a very rigid diet or going for very long times without eating. For a lot of highly trained athletes, we might be talking about 200 or 300 calorie difference, like, you know, deficit, as far as, not deficit, but like less than what you were eating when you were dancing 8 hours a day and jumping and doing full out run-throughs. So by 200 or 300 calories, we might be talking about a relatively small amount of food. It might be a couple of tablespoons of peanut butter and some salad dressing, or it might be, you know, just a couple of servings. So it does not mean that just because we're not exercising as much or just because we're not jumping as much, that we should go into this very restrictive or random diet that we found on the internet. And the way I would suggest doing that is not by cutting, if you, now this is a big if, everyone's different. If you have to cut, say, 200 calories out, don't do it all at once. Do it in small increments. You know, cut 25 at breakfast, you know, 25 at lunch, maybe 50 later for a snack, maybe another 25 later. Do it in these small increments throughout the day. And the most important thing is that if dancers want to maintain the muscle mass, if they want to maintain lean tissue and maintain a relatively low body fat percentage during this time, food frequency and how often they eat throughout the day is going to be key. So don't go for very long stretches without eating. There's a whole concept that I talk about a lot called energy balance. And I just feel like if dancers could understand energy balance, that would really be the key to maintaining high muscle mass, relatively low body fat, and of course, having less injuries. And by energy balance, what I mean is calories in versus calories out. So giving your body just the right amount to get you through, say, the next 2 or 3 hours. So eating breakfast, having a snack mid-morning, eating lunch, having a snack mid-afternoon, and then eating a healthy dinner. As opposed to some of the clients that I've worked with who are like, don't eat breakfast at all, don't eat until 12:30, starving by 3, and by dinner time, they're so hungry, they start craving sugar, and they just get famished, and then we tend to go into overnight, like just too much eating at night. I've had dancers that tell me, I think I have an overeating kind of disorder, or I think I have a sugar addiction. And when we just put them on a regular meal plan that has these smaller, more frequent meals throughout the day, we realize they don't have an eating disorder. They don't have an addiction to sugar. They were just hungry. And we just needed to give them some food in the day. So starting with a really good breakfast is a great way to keep your metabolism up and to keep your muscle tissue up and active. Because if you've just come off of an overnight fast, it is really important to give your body some fuel first thing in the morning. So if you forget everything else I said today, just eat breakfast. That's kind of a really key one.
Yes, absolutely.
That makes me think just really kind of the more judgment that we assign to food, the more sort of skewed our sense of perception becomes, right? Just because judgment desires punishment.
Mm-hmm.
However that shows up. That's sort of I love that statement there. Because we either turn it towards us, we turn it towards our bodies, or we turn it towards other people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Such a good point. And I think dancers can deeply relate to that, this idea of like judgment desires punishment, right? Like I did this, so now I'm punishing myself with this, right? I mean,
Right.
Kathryn, do you relate to that the same way that I am listening to that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we all do that. You know what I mean? And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, how it's like, oh, if I did more exercise today, then I can eat more. And it's this kind of reward and punishment system. I know I used to do that too. Like if I had a harder rehearsal day, it's like, well, I can eat more now because I had a harder rehearsal day. And it shouldn't be this sort of reward or, well, I didn't do enough rehearsals today, so maybe I need to skip lunch, you know?
Well, your metabolism doesn't change that fast. So
Yeah.
exactly what Kathryn's saying, like it is this mentality of, oh, I had a hard rehearsal day so I can eat more. Your metabolic rate is not going to change overnight. Like
Absolutely.
your metabolic rate is really dependent on how much muscle you have, how active you are, how old you are. It's not going to change because of one day or 2 days or even a pandemic. Like your metabolic rate is dependent on other factors. So exactly what Kathryn was just saying, don't be so judgmental and this reward mentality or this restrictive mentality about food, and definitely don't fall in the problem area of, well, I ate too much yesterday, therefore today I have to not eat anything. No, that's not how it works. That's not how the body works. That's not how metabolism works. Your muscles still need food. Your brain still needs calories. So you can't, you know, if you ate too much yesterday, who cares? So what? The day is over. No big deal. Move on. You know, you maybe you enjoyed some cake. It was your birthday. Great. That's fantastic. Don't worry about it. Just get back on track the next day. Get up and have breakfast.
So what you're saying, Emily, is that like if I indulged in something and then I wake up the next morning and all of a sudden I see it on my body, that's actually not true?
No!
That was a trap that I fell into often as a dancer. So thank you for saying that.
You heard it here.
No, you are so not alone.
Emily, there's actually a question that just came in that is very related to what you're talking about, so I want to bring it up right now, which is, do you promote intuitive eating during this time? Sometimes when I eat more at night, I don't get hungry until like 12 o'clock or 1 the next day. Is that bad?
Intuitive eating is a beautiful thing. Mindful eating is a beautiful thing. And there are some wonderful resources out there on both of those topics written by very great qualified people. But there's sometimes we maybe don't realize that our body still needs food. When we may not, there may be factors that are lessening your hunger satiety cues. Stress is a big one. Stress is one of the first things that comes to mind. So I feel like, yes, listen to your body. Absolutely. But if your body's saying that you want to be fasting from nighttime, let's say 9 o'clock at night until 12 o'clock the next day, that's not intuitive eating. That's pretty restrictive. That's a very long fast. So intuitive eating to me is more listening to your portion sizes and listening to your body when you feel like you're full, and listening to your body when you feel like you're hungry. And you can eat a little more if you feel hungry, or you can stop when you're full. And that sounds easy on paper, but that's actually something that we do whole trainings on, and lots of education on, because it might sometimes be a little harder than you realize, especially if a dancer has ever gone through a phase of eating challenges or disordered behaviors. That can affect your hunger satiety hormones, which are called ghrelin and leptin. And when those get a little bit off, it might really affect our hunger satiety. Also, nutrient deficiencies can affect how hungry you are and your desire to eat. Zinc is, of course, the most well-known. You guys may have already been hearing a lot about zinc in the news with COVID-19. A zinc deficiency, which is not uncommon in our dancer world, can actually lead to wanting to eat less desire for food. Right? So let's all keep our zinc levels up. It's really important for immune function. And it will also help those hunger satiety hormones as well.
Absolutely. So I want to go back to a question that came in a bit ago and is, I think, important. So this question is coming from Peru. Hey, hi, Peru. My question is, do you think a stereotypical ballet body is actually attainable for all people? Because I've noticed that when someone doesn't look like that, most people think that it's because of a lack of willpower. Kathryn, do you want to start on this? I've heard you speak very openly about this very issue.
Yeah, I think the reality is everybody is built differently. You know, I am a person who has, as an example, I have a really big rib cage, very short torso. So when I put on weight, it all goes to my midsection first. Some people might have a longer waist and the weight goes to their thighs first. And so everybody is different. And I think this sort of ideal, attainable, like we all have to look a certain way. No, it's actually not possible. Then you take into consideration things like illnesses or hormones or things like that, or your body is changing. You know, I think a big issue that female dancers fall into is many of us were hired at 16, 17, 18 when we were not done growing. And so then artistic staff sees you as a prepubescent, you know, because I don't know about the rest of dancers, but I developed very late. And so my body was not done changing. By the time I hit 21, 22, not only was I had the illness, but that's when my body had started to become more womanly. And people are looking at you going, what happened to you? When in actuality, you're just simply growing up as naturally as you can. So I think that's a huge issue for females especially. But I want to also address something that Emily was just saying about the stress. For me, when I'm put under more pressure to look a certain way, when I put my pressure on myself to look a certain way and just fixate on it, and then you end up eating less, but I actually end up putting on weight. So because of the stress, because of the more I fixate and stress and I have to look like this, the worse it actually is. So during the Firebird time, I was actually just under so much stress and not eating as much, and it ends up backfiring. So I think that's a huge thing to be aware of too, is that your brain is a huge thing in all of this. You know, you could be eating perfectly, but there is no such thing, but perfectly. And even if you're so like this about it, it's just not going to work. So I think our mental state has a huge impact on our bodies as well. But I think, there is this attainable, this aesthetic that is not attainable for everybody. Absolutely not.
I would 100% agree with Kathryn. I think that was very well put. And thank you for saying all of that, Kathryn. That was excellent. Stress affects blood sugar. Stress affects your hormones. So the more stressed you are, it's going to change how your blood sugar goes up and down. And that changes how much you want to eat or not eat. That changes your cortisol levels. It changes a lot of your stress hormones. So I think it's really crucial to just keep in mind what stress does to our eating habits. And I've seen it again and again. I've been a dietitian in the dance world for 10 years now, and I've seen so many times the more rigid somebody is about what they eat, or the more they're dieting, often it's several weeks after that they end up coming to see me, because it's harder for them to they gain weight. They tend to gain weight, and it's often gaining fat tissue, not muscle tissue or not any other kind of tissue. And I do a whole talk on all of the science behind why that is. I love to geek out on the science about that. I actually spent a year researching that because it's so fascinating. I won't do that to you guys, and I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version of this. But basically, that being so restrictive and being so rigid while being stressed and having your blood sugar go all over the place and your cortisol go all over the place is one of the reasons that we end up having weight gain over time as opposed to just maintaining your muscle tissue. The best way to maintain your dancer's instrument is just to eat regularly. Again, I know I said this before, but the smaller, more frequent meals, the regular meals throughout the day, not loading up on any one particular nutrient or restricting one particular nutrient, like protein and carbs. Everybody likes to freak out about carbs and glorify protein like it's a religious experiment. This whole protein is like, it's amazing to me how we in the United States, we think that protein is like should be elevated or something. No, that's not at all based on science. So if you're just cutting out carbs and you're protein loading, I can almost guarantee that give it 8 weeks and that's when we're going to see the weight gain. I'd much rather see a dancer on a reasonable meal plan, smaller, more frequent meals, focusing on lots of fruits and vegetables, focusing on some whole grains like oats or whole wheat or rice or quinoa, and focusing on the lean proteins, beans, peas, nuts, and seeds, which are really cheap if anybody's on a budget.
Emily, I love your passion for all of this work. I kind of want to put my 2 cents in just about that question and what it brings up for me. I think a lot of body image dissatisfaction comes from sort of this idea of what is ideal. So we have to look at the ballet world. We have to look at our entire society and what it means to be thin, right? The thin ideal and the attachment to what that means to have the ideal body or the ideal dancer's body. And if we're actually looking at the historical context, I love to say this in dance, the body, the ballerina is basically born out of this idea of the sylph. And I'm not sure if any of you all know what a sylph is, but it's dead, right? It is wafy, it is ethereal, it is otherworldly. That is our standard that we are up against in the ballet world for you ballerinas, right? So acknowledging that piece can then really help in terms of our own acceptance of our body, right? So we have to just put out there what's actually going on. Like, where are we getting these ideas from? And then you can start doing your own exploration with it. Like, what does this mean for me? What if I don't fit into that standard? What if my body is different? What if my torso is shorter? What if my whatever, right? And so that's where the exploration and the conversation can come to. And so kind of using body image, even mirroring like a relationship with a person. You know, what are the qualities that are important? I mean, I think of respect. I think of like having a full range of emotion, right? You can be dissatisfied and you can be happy. Just this attentiveness and this care that we're taking, a sense of knowing, like that's where that thin ideal piece comes in. Like, why do we think this way? What's going on with that? So when we start treating ourselves and our bodies like we're in a relationship with that, it becomes less of a project and more of sort of this constant ebb and flow of today, I have acceptance. Tomorrow, I am dissatisfied. That's what a relationship is about. And that does not mean that it's gonna fall apart or that, you know, it's just bad, right? We're labeling it as like, oh no, now we have no worth anymore.
Absolutely. And I have questions coming in right now from the perspective of teachers on this subject. And, you know, there are kind of two prongs I'm going to kind of put out there, and I'll let the panelists kind of dig in as they see fit here. But one is around, let's see. So one is around how the family eats, right? And the food that is available in the family space and the habits that are being seen in the family space. And I would even add to that maybe the expectations of the family, right? Around the food and body stuff related to their dance student. So let's start there, and I'll kind of bring the rest in as we discuss. Emily, can I start with you on that with regard to dancers being able to eat healthily and nutritionally when the context of their family environment may not be supportive of that necessarily?
I see that a lot in my work. Yeah, I mean, being a dancer is a very unique thing. I grew up in the South with football playing brothers. I ate very differently than my brothers did. And so it's okay if there's somebody in the family that might eat a little differently than their family. It doesn't mean it has to be disordered. It doesn't mean it has to go off a deep end of being different, but it might mean that that person has different energy or protein or nutrient needs than their sibling or than their parent who maybe isn't exercising 8 to 10 hours a day. So I think, first of all, it's just saying, if you have a child who is a dancer at whatever level, their nutrient needs are probably going to be different than, say, the rest of the family. And that's okay. Let's find out what they need. Let's find out what's best for them, just like you would if there was educational differences or if there were learning differences. You would go out of your way to find a tutor or to find out what kind of learning style fits your child best. I think it's the same for food. If you have one child who's a football player and another who's a dancer, they're probably going to eat different, and that's okay.
Yeah. And then kind of, if I can bring this to Kathryn and then to you, Josh. Sorry, there are a lot of questions coming in, so I'm trying to like parse them all out for you. So going back to this idea of like the self, right? Like the perfect body image. And I have teachers in Q&A right now who are worried, you know, about their dancers seeing these examples and trying to force themselves into that mold, and how they can perhaps be helpful in being body positive, or trying to help them avoid, you know, disordered eating and poor choices. Kathryn, do you have any thoughts about that?
This is a tricky thing because, you know, if you're helping a student and saying, you know, it could be a little reverse psychology if you say, oh, well, you know, you don't have to look like that. That kid might take that as she thinks I'm fat. So it's very, very tricky. I think that's why it is important that we have people in our industry speaking out different body types. You know, unfortunately, artistic directors have their aesthetics, and they're absolutely allowed to, but, you know, for those of us who don't fit that aesthetic, you know, it's rough, and then these students see that. So it is incredibly tricky, and I think you just have to be positive with all of your students. You know, one thing I tell the women, you know, who are struggling, as hard as it is, you have to say, you know, you have to think about the bigger picture. Do you want to have babies later on? You know, is it worth you fitting into this mold and ruining your body, and then later on not being able to have children? Because I've seen it happen. So it is very, very tricky, and I don't think there's a perfect answer for that. You know, you just have to be supportive. You have to make sure your students all feel valued. You know, it is a thing that teachers will often pay attention more to the thinnest student. So teachers, I ask you to check yourselves and make sure you're giving each student individual attention and the same amount of attention regardless of their body size, because it just seems to be a thing that, oh, she's thinner, so her technique must be better. But is it? You know what I mean? Thinner dancers get away with more because they're thinner, and so their lines look better. And so they think they are better, and so then these other kids see it who might have just as beautiful lines, if not more so, but don't see it like that. So it is very tricky. You can't address each student the same. It has to be individual. It has to be, you know, that's a very delicate thing, I think. I don't have a great answer for that. Josh, maybe you do more so.
Yeah, I think that you stated that very eloquently, because I think that the big piece that you're getting at really is that there is not sort of this right answer to how we approach working with dancers, because we're human, right? We are all unique. We're all different. We all have sort of just these qualities that we bring, which makes it so special. But I really want to acknowledge this idea of the perceptual bias that we bring. So even that idea of what you said, Kathryn, about like, you know, if you're thinner, then your line looks better. And sort of that, where has that come from? Where has the conditioning around like what that means for like a line is better when it looks longer and more sinewy, right? So that's that perceptual bias piece of actually examining like, well, have I even thought about what it would look like to see diversity in body, right? Have I even made space for that to happen? And I'll tell you right now, like being on the other side of dance, when I go, you know, where does my eye go? It goes to sort of what I have been told over the past 20 years is the acceptable body. And so that for me is something that I am actually working on, because I can't go back into the dance world and have these expectations of what that standard is supposed to look like. That's not okay for someone who's supposed to have this sort of like objective view about what's going on. So I am naming right now that I am having to do my work around what that means for what I have seen at New York City Ballet, for what I have seen at Pacific Northwest Ballet, for what I've seen at Kansas City Ballet, whatever that means. But the way that I would also approach this is really through curiosity, you know, being able to say, well, you know, where did you get the idea that looking like an ethereal being was ideal, right? So coming into it from a very non-judgmental stance, because like Kathryn's saying, reverse psychology, right? Will be like, they're saying something else when maybe that's not true, but because a teacher or a director is in a position of power, it feels like manipulation.
Right.
So really being able to just, you know, get honest information, find that out without implying, without insinuating, having openness and curiosity.
Absolutely. And there's another question coming in related to this, kind of going back to the perspective of the dancer and all of this, is that, you know, unfortunately, many dancers have been told that they're, quote, fat. You know, when I was dancing, that word was leveled at me multiple times. Or they've had a teacher poke something on their body during class and go, oh, squishy, right? Like, again, that happened to me when I was a dance student, right? Like, these are real things that happen. Josh, I want to start with you. How do you as a dancer, even knowing, I'll use my own experience as an example, even knowing in that moment, like, whoa, this is wrong, right? Like, this is not right. Like, even 17-year-old, I want to please everyone, me, was like, this is not right. But I still internalized it. I still felt that I was fat, right? So do you have any advice for dancers kind of dealing with that?
Yeah, I mean, that also is a very sort of multifaceted approach to what that means in terms of how do we not internalize things, or how do we not assign self-worth to our external qualities that are going on. And I think that that's when it really gets important kind of to go within and to really get familiar with why did I start dancing in the first place? Was it because, you know, I was going to be put on this pedestal of elitism with the way my body looks? I think I remember actually starting to dance because I loved to move to music. I loved to be in the community. I loved to have this expression of myself. And so I think, again, being able to zoom out, right, and look at the perspective of why am I doing this in the first place? I think that's a really good place to start. Again, there are going to be a lot of other nuanced pieces just in terms of challenging some of our own core beliefs. Where do we get the core belief? Why do we feel worthless, right? Those are aspects. And another piece that I would add just to that is making note when you say those things to yourself, right? So you hear a teacher, you hear a director, you hear a peer say something. Do you internalize that and then repeat it to yourself? Or is there a way to make some space, even just to then say, is this serving me or is this not helpful in terms of what I'm wanting to do as a dancer or just being a dancer?
Absolutely. Kathryn, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, I get so many stories of these people who could, you know, just their dreams were shot down based on how they looked. And it's so frustrating because, you know, oftentimes you see these beautiful artists or the dancers with the artistry, you know, and they don't get to do as much because of that. And again, it's because of the expectation. And it's difficult. And I just think about, you know, my 3-4-year-old self, which is why I got into dance too, like Josh said. I loved moving to music. I can't imagine telling that little 4-year-old, you know what, you are beautiful. You know, I know you love this and everything, but you're actually gonna not be, you know, it really, the key to your success depends on how thin you are. If you think about it like that, that's horrible. And I had somebody actually, and I think this is amazing, somebody said to me, you know, we have to remember that these kids we are putting down, these kids who are not accepted, they are the future audiences. And we don't want to damage them so much that they don't want to come to the ballet when they get older. They don't want to put their kids in ballet when they get older. Oh, ballet damaged me, so you're not doing that. Oh, ballet damaged me, so I don't want to go to the audience. I think actually the future of the art form depends on diversity, because if we just exclude, these people are going to be so hurt by this and so kind of damaged by this, they're not going to want to have anything to do with it. So if we think about it like that, I think we have to move to a more diverse situation. Otherwise, we're not going to have any audiences. We're not going to have anybody wanting to do it because they're all going to say, well, I'm not thin enough, so there's no point.
100%.
I love that, Kathryn.
Yeah.
I love that. I love what you just said. I even wrote it down. The future of the art form depends on diversity. And I think that I 100% agree with that. Diversity in all its forms. I think that in many ways, the dance world has changed a lot. In many ways, it hasn't.
Right.
I know that I started my education 17 years ago with going into nutrition. And at that time, there was a lot of people who were like, well, a nutritionist in the dance world, you're never going to find a job. That's not, you know, no one's going to want that. And now I get a lot of phone calls.
I bet.
So I think the power of food and sports nutrition in the dance world is more respected than it used to be. But I know that for me as a dietitian, or for all of us who are leaders in this art form, we may not be able to change a director's views. We may not be able to single-handedly change the aesthetic, but we can help that one dancer. We can help him or her be their best selves. And that might mean if they were poked in class and said squishy, for example, it's helping them say, no, don't go down a road towards this extreme dieting. Let's get you on a really healthy eating plan that's going to support you in so many ways. Because, I mean, we've all been there, and I've worked with so many dancers who got the fat talk, and then they got sent to me, and they come to my office, and they're like so sad, you know? And I'm like, you know what? I would much rather work with a dancer and not have them go down this really terrible restrictive eating, dieting roller coaster. I would much rather get them early and talk about what is a healthy eating plan, how can you support your body. You know, whether you end up dancing for New York City Ballet or whether you end up, you know, becoming an audience member, let's help you know how good food can be, and that it's your friend, not your enemy.
Yeah.
And I really believe that we can have a dancer aesthetic and still eat good, healthy food. I really still, after all these years, I believe that. I know that we can have a professional dancer level body and still be eating regularly and be eating good, healthy food. I believe that in my heart, and I've seen it happen, and I know it's true.
Yeah, and I think I you know, and I feel the same way on the mental health side of things, right? Like, you can demand excellence and be a demanding, effective teacher without motivating with shame and without disregarding the mental wellness of the dancer in the room, which unfortunately has been sort of what's the word, canonized into the way that we dance. And Kathryn, I think that one of the stats that I use a lot when I'm talking to leadership on mental health is that There's a Dance USA study that shows that more than half of the more than half of the audience in dance is actually current and former dancers. And you and I discussed that when we chatted for Dance Magazine. So it's just absolutely true. Like, if you continue to eliminate people as not worthy, why would they come back, right?
Exactly.
100%. Like, it's just absolutely true. And then so I want to be mindful of time here. We're going to do about 5 more minutes. There are a lot of questions coming in. So anything that we don't get to, I'm going to do my best to follow up with the panelists and get you answers to. So I do apologize that we're not going to get to all of them. So I have a couple questions, Emily, I want to put toward you with regard to, and actually I think, Josh, this is relevant to you as well. Looking at the kind of tween-aged and teen-aged dancer and the way that their bodies are changing and the ways in which this stuff can be even more challenging at that age. I think it's physically challenging. I think it's also psychologically challenging, right? Because a lot of people experience their first mental illness in their late teens, right? When they're dealing with the same kinds of things. So Emily, would you be willing to start with kind of from a food perspective, how this might be more challenging for them and what advice you might have?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm a mom of a tween and a teen. And my teenager is a dancer as well. So I feel this. I feel you all out there, all of you teens and you tweens. I'm living that right now in my house with my girls. So I just think that parents and teachers need to be really careful about their messaging at this age and really careful about the words that we use if we're teaching in class or if we're a parent to these kids. As far as foods go, this is often when an adolescent will start their first diet, or they start to become much more aware of diet messaging online, especially right now. I know my daughter's spending way more time on the internet than she ever used to, and so I'm very mindful of some of the food messaging that she's getting. As far as foods go, we just stick to what grandma said. It's a lot of just keep the fruits and vegetables in the house at eye level. Make them more, just make them easy. The easy choice is often the first choice, because adolescents, they don't really necessarily want to make a salad. If the greens are in a bag in the bottom of the crisper, nobody's making that salad. So I think it's important to make the healthy choices as soon as they open the refrigerator, with that look that teenagers have, which is probably what's happening in my house right now, that there's nothing to eat. Having a bowl of grapes right at eye level, right as they open the fridge, because then while they're eye rolling at you, they can be eating grapes or something. I always have a huge bowl of fruit right out in the middle of the kitchen. It's tons of fruit right there. I tend to go ahead and have the carrots or the veggies just washed and they're ready in the crisper, and they can do that job as well. I'm not doing all the work. Have easy stuff at your fingertips, peanut butter and jellies. I have a lot of those little I like the McDougall's brand cup of soups, or I like the little miso cups, or the little soba noodle things, because all they have to do is heat water and pour it in. And then teenagers feel they're they have some choice in what they're eating, and they can go find things. So I think as far as having teens and tweens in the house, just make it easy. Make the healthy choice the automatic choice, the one that's just sort of grab and go, and allowing them to have choices in food autonomy themselves, letting them help you make the grocery list, and listening to them. And then also just keeping some of the less healthy stuff out of the house, because that's also easy to grab. We don't necessarily need to have a house full of sodas. We don't necessarily need to have, junk food in the house all the time. I'm fine with cookies every now and then, but we don't necessarily need to have the Costco size, bag of cookies in the pantry. So it's just arranging our food environment so that it supports all of us, including our teens and tweens.
Josh, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, you know, what it brings up for me is really identity work and what it means to be a dancer, but what it also means to be a teen or a tween, and all of those other interests that, you know, developmentally other peers are actually doing. So like, well, none of us are going to dances right now, but more of that like socialization piece, hanging out with friends, baking, going on hikes, loving nature. Like, what are the different pieces of your identity along with being a dancer? Because when we have one identity and we're focusing just really on, I am only a dancer, that really sets us up for a lot of disappointment. And also, I feel like when we start eliminating things from our lives, so that could be hobbies that we once loved, but now we don't have time because we have ballet all day, you know, on Saturday and Sunday and after school. And right, when we start eliminating, that actually is sort of an entryway for depression, for anxiety, because we are no longer in tune with all of the pieces of ourselves that bring us joy and happiness.
100%, Josh. And actually, if anyone's interested in diving a little deeper on identity, the first mental health town hall series was on perfectionism, and we dug into identity. So there's a place to see that as well. And we can also follow up more with Josh, because honestly, we could do an entire town hall on identity.
Can I add one thing?
Oh, please.
Along with this, I think you have to remember, and a friend said this to me once, you are a human being, not a human dancing. So, and I just thought, well, that's good. So yeah, you have to have other interests. You have to remember, you know, because I used to put labels on it like, well, I'm a dancer, so I can't do that. Well, I'm a dancer, so I can't eat that. Well, I'm a dancer because you're not a dancer. That's what you do. That's one of the things you love, but that is not your entire self.
Absolutely. And before we kind of wrap up here, Kathryn, I just, you're such a tremendous resource to the dancers, and it's so powerful for them to hear you speak about the challenges that you face. And so I wonder if we could kind of end the live discussion with advice that you might have for the young dancers as we conclude this talk today.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think one of the reasons that people can identify with me is that I'm still dealing with it. You know, I think before, dancers were scared to speak up until they retired. And then it all came out. But I try to be the one that says I'm living this. This is what's happening. Kind of like with Miami, when I got taken out of Firebird, this is what's happening. This is the reality. So it's like, I try and be as open as I can, because I wish I had that when I was younger, you know, because we all internalize it. We all think, you know, I'm the only one that's dealing with this. I'm not perfect. I'm the only one that, you know, can't have it together. I don't have it together. Why does everybody else have it together? So I think for young dancers, you just have to remember that, you know, first of all, you're worth it no matter what. Like we just said, your identity is not based on the fact that you're a dancer. It's based on the fact that you are you. You know, I tell some students of mine all the time, if you have to, as silly as this sounds, make a list of your strengths, whether it's ballet strengths, whether it's, you know, other strengths. You know, if you're struggling in class, if you don't have good turnout, what can you do well? You know, are you a good turner? Do you have good artistry? Do you have this? And they think, oh, that's so stupid. You know, write it out and look at it and go, okay, I'm doing better than I thought I was, you know, because I think oftentimes we think we just are terrible at everything. And that doesn't help us at all. And I think if you're a young dancer and you're struggling with your body, remember, you're not done growing yet. That's another thing that we talked about. It's going to change. I think the gentler you can be with yourself, especially right now, the better it's going to be. You know, nothing is worth your health. Truly, I'm living proof of that. You know, I know a lot of people are going to think I'm crazy for not signing a contract again with a big company, but it was not the mental thing I went through and the way it was handled and what it was doing to me is not worth this sort of ideal, like, well, I'm a soloist with a big company. That's not worth your health. It's really not. Take it from me. Because there are many, many dancers who are struggling with this and feel like they can't speak up, feel like they are worthless if they don't dance anymore. And it's just simply not true. And again, it's another one of those things that's very tricky. There's no perfect answer and you should be like this, but I think it's something that everybody has dealt with this in some way during their career and during their life, dancer or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and going back to what Josh said earlier about like, does this serve me, right?
Right.
Is it serving me right now? So listen, everybody, I think that the four of us could sit here and talk about this for a week and a half.
Yeah.
And as much as I know we would all love to do it, and I know they're all feeling the way I'm feeling right now, which is like tingling with a million things you want to keep saying. And we can continue that discussion another time and blogs and other forums. We will do our best to review the things we didn't get to in this. I want to thank, like from the bottom of my heart, my panelists for this. You know, over my period of time writing, I have this Rolodex, if you will, of these incredible human beings. And really the idea behind these town halls was to be like, hey, everybody should get to talk to them, not just me. So I'm deeply honored that you trusted me enough to be here today and that you were willing to share your expertise. Kathryn, to you in particular, for being willing to make yourself vulnerable and the emotional work that takes. It's exhausting, so I really applaud you for it. So we're going to go to our last slide here. Thank you so much to my panelists. Something that we did touch on in this meeting and that comes up often is reconnecting with why you started dancing in the first place, right? Why did you start dancing, right? If you're like Kathryn or me, or I'm sure Josh and Emily as well, you were probably a toddler dancing around in your kitchen or something, and someone said, oh, look at the joy, look how happy they are, right? We have to get them into dance. And then at some point it turned into a job, or it turned into an identity. And it, you know, it started to maybe be less fun, right? There's so much riding on it. So what this time, to me, what I want dancers to internalize right now is that this time away from the studio is the time to reconnect with why you dance. And you dance for joy. That's why you started dancing. You know, take your Instagram bars, do that, that's great. But every once in a while, please just turn on a great song and shake your booty in the kitchen, and it doesn't matter what it looks like, right? You can see on the slide the ways to get in touch with us. I actually chose today's Dance for Joy song. It is a song called Gimme Sympathy by a band called Metric. And if you don't have enough electric pop in your life, I suggest you check out Metric. So we're going to go ahead and play the Dance for Joy song. Thank you, panelists. The recording will be up hopefully soon. And yeah, bye everyone.